My son said he was repulsed by me. Those were his precise words. I heard them myself. He sent a voice message to someone, perhaps his wife, perhaps a buddy, and accidentally sent it to me instead. But that was all it took. In that moment, everything within me shattered. All that I had struggled to preserve for years crumbled to nothing. And that's when I did something no one anticipated. I sold the house. Yes, the house I constructed through hard work and suffering. The house valued at over $900,000. I sold it all, left a note on the table, and vanished. My name is Gregory. I'm 78 years old, and if you stay with me until the end, perhaps you'll grasp why a father like me arrived at this breaking point. I'm not flawless, never have been, but one thing I always strived to be was there for him, even when overlooked, demeaned, treated like an inconvenience. I stayed put. But that voice message, that recording was the ultimate insult to a man who simply wished to grow old with respect. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The initial time I suspected my son truly despised me was on a weekend afternoon. He had stopped by to visit, or rather to borrow some equipment as usual, and hardly stepped inside before grumbling about the odor in the home. He claimed the scent of aging was intolerable. I offered a faint grin, acted oblivious, suggested it was merely the stuffy air. But deep down, that wounded me. Yet like countless fathers, I held it in, assumed it was a fleeting irritation, that perhaps he was exhausted. We always create justifications for our kids. Michael. That's his name. My only child, born from a 35-year marriage with the woman who was the true love of my existence. Mary. She passed away far too soon. A severe heart attack created a void in the home and in my spirit. And Michael didn't shed a tear at the service. He simply stated, "Now you'll figure out how to manage by yourself," and departed. He was 30 years old back then, and I never erased that statement from my mind. I attempted to bridge the gap in the years that followed, invited him for meals, for gatherings, important occasions. He always fabricated a reason, or showed up, and remained glued to his device with a grumpy expression. Never embraced me genuinely, never inquired if I required assistance, and when he did ask, it was only to belittle me. Need cash. Dad. As if I were a load on his shoulders. But still, I persisted. I purchased items with him in mind, preserved belongings, furnishings, even mementos from his youth, believing that someday he'd value them. Because at my core, I wanted to trust that the young boy was still inside him. That young boy who awaited me at the entrance when I returned from my job, who climbed onto my knee to listen to tales, who wept when I departed. Where had that Michael vanished to? That Tuesday, when I awoke and noticed the notification on my phone, I assumed it was an error. It was a voice recording, 3 minutes and 15 seconds. When I pressed play, I didn't identify the voice initially. He was speaking rapidly, with fury, like someone unloading to a confidant. And then came the line. I'm repulsed by that elderly guy. Honestly, he turns my stomach. Just imagining that someday I'll have to look after him. I wish I could vanish. My heart ceased. I inhaled deeply, replayed it. Yes, it was him. It was my son's voice discussing me with revulsion, with loathing, as if I were a useless load in his world. I rose, sat on the bed's edge, and remained there for hours gazing at the ground. I didn't weep. Strangely enough, I didn't weep. I believe I had no more tears for that. I simply stood, opened the wardrobe, retrieved the papers, opened the file where I stored the certificates, the property title, dressed myself, headed to the real estate agency, said, "I want to sell under market price. I want to sell quickly. I want to vanish. I want to vanish from the existence of someone who's repulsed by me." 3 days later, the transaction was finalized. A pair from Boston arrived to view the property and adored it. They didn't haggle. They mentioned they desired to relocate to a more peaceful area. They questioned me about the motive for selling. I merely replied, "It's time to begin anew." That evening, I penned a note with my steady, resolute script, devoid of feeling. I wrote it this way: "The repulsive elderly guy left you homeless and went to pursue his own path. Farewell." I placed it on the living room surface. Beside it, I left the home key. I gathered all that belonged to me in a single day: garments, papers, a picture of Mary, my billfold, and a denim jacket she presented to me on our final anniversary together. I proceeded to the airport the following dawn, purchased a one-way fare, to where I'll reveal shortly. But it was distant, a spot where no one recognized me, where I could stroll the avenue without embarrassment, without anticipating a ring that never arrives, where I could spend my remaining days in tranquility. Michael only discovered I had vanished 4 days later, when he attempted to retrieve an old scooter he had overlooked, knocked on the entrance, phoned, no response, entered, and observed the vacant home, the note on the surface, the key, and the resonance of his own tone within the dwelling where he matured. They claim he contacted some kin frantically, fabricated that he was concerned. But it wasn't concern. It was dread, because only then did he comprehend what he had forfeited. Only then did he recognize that the elderly guy he claimed to be repulsed by was the one who maintained everything intact. But I was already distant with my travel document marked with an unburdened spirit for the first occasion. Sensing that I no longer required to plead for affection from someone who never offered me even courtesy. And that, my companion, that possesses a flavor of liberation that defies description. And it was in this fresh location, remote from the history, that something occurred that I didn't foresee. On the aircraft, I remained quiet throughout. I positioned myself by the viewport, fastened my restraint, and merely observed the vapors outside. It was as if the entire globe had been reset. I no longer possessed a residence, no longer had relatives, no longer had a background, just that fare, that memo in my pouch, and the compact valise with my attire and documents. But I didn't feel hollow. Quite the opposite. It was the initial instance I felt I was liberating myself. The ache was still present, naturally, but it was an ache that no longer dominated me. I selected a region where the tongue was identical, where I could cope, a temperate locale with unpretentious folks. I liquidated everything I owned, and with the funds from the property, I exchanged a portion. I established a fresh profile in my name at a financial institution where nobody identified me, without beneficiaries, without benefits connected, without remnants. It was as if I had been reborn. And you know what? I required that. After a lifetime attempting to demonstrate, I was a decent father. It was time to demonstrate I was still a complete individual. I leased a modest small dwelling in a serene community. On the inaugural day, I visited the supermarket, acquired loaves, dairy, some produce, and 2 containers of regional brew. I positioned myself on the veranda and observed the activity. 2 youngsters played unshod on the gravel path. An aged gentleman brushed the walkway. The resident opposite draped garments on the cord. Nobody recognized me, and that provided me serenity. A serenity I hadn't experienced in generations. But naturally, at dusk, when all was hushed, recollection arrived because we tote isolation in our pouch, even when we alter residences. And that dusk there in my fresh dwelling, alone with a dish of broth, I gazed at the bare partition and recalled something. I recalled the initial occasion Michael became ill, still tiny. He was about 5 years old, a high temperature that wouldn't subside with anything. Mary and I spent 4 nights without slumber. She perched on the bed's rim, moistening his brow with a moist fabric, and I, with the vehicle entrance unlatched, prepared to rush to the clinic at any instant. When the temperature subsided, he awoke, gazed at me, and said with that raspy small tone, "Daddy, were you here the entire time?" And I responded, "I was. Son, I'll remain eternally." That ripped me apart internally because I did remain. I remained through all stages. I remained when he had an identity turmoil in his teens, when he fled from home due to a trivial dispute, when he desired to abandon university, when he parted with his initial partner. I remained when he required a guarantor, when he wrecked the vehicle, when he forfeited his position. I remained even when he dismissed me with chilly terms. And now he said he was repulsed by me. That dusk I uncorked the brew and had a sip gazing at the heavens. I made a silent toast to my own bravery, because it's not simple to abandon everything. It's not simple to acknowledge that we lost a child in existence, that the affection we provided doesn't return anymore. But it's also not simple to exist pleading for warmth. And I grew weary of that. I grew weary of being that elderly guy who awaits a ring on the weekend, who feigns he didn't hear the impoliteness, who offers gifts on birthdays and receives a curt appreciation. I refused to perish that way. In the ensuing days, I began strolling around the community. We assume we're too aged to begin anew. But the reality is, everyone deserves a fresh start. I enrolled at a local archive, encountered a cluster of seniors who assembled to converse and play checkers in the plaza. I acquired a fresh hat. I became a regular at the neighborhood store. I formed a friendship with a gentleman named Henry, who lately lost his spouse and had the same expression of yearning that I possessed. We conversed for hours about everything, except about offspring, because I comprehended their suffering. We only disclose with those who already bear their own. I never attempted contact again, neither with Michael nor with anyone in the kin, and I never received word from him again. If he perused the memo, if he panicked, if he wept, or if he chuckled, I don't concern myself because the time I have remaining now is mine. I won't squander it attempting to mend what only exists on one side. Let him cope with the remorse. I already had my portion. But that Friday morning, a correspondence arrived for me without originator, without label, just with the expression on the exterior. I discovered this in your son's compartment, and inside there was an aged snapshot of me and Michael. me cradling him in my arms at an outing we had at Golden Gate Park when he was 7 years old. It was a lovely day. I recall well. Mary captured the image. He was giggling loudly. And in that picture, we were joyful. We were everything I thought I would never forfeit. The correspondence didn't state anything else. Just that. The snapshot. The casing. And that expression. Someone from the history. Someone who knew. Someone who witnessed what I endured and what I forfeited. Someone who desired to convey to me, without terms, that my narrative wasn't futile. I preserved the snapshot in a basic frame and positioned it on the living room ledge. Not to recall the son I forfeited, but to recall the father I was and still am, because nobody will obliterate what I accomplished. Not even quietude. That late afternoon, to the sound of gentle precipitation striking the ceiling, I inhaled deeply and penned something in my journal that I carry with me since Mary's times. The greatest fortitude of a man is not pardoning, it's knowing when to depart. And at that precise instant, someone rapped on my entrance. The rap on the entrance surprised me. I wasn't anticipating anyone, especially on a drizzly late afternoon like that. For a moment, my heart accelerated. Not because I thought it was Michael, but because after so long existing in quietude, any human interaction gains another significance. I rose gradually, adjusted my blouse, proceeded to the entrance, and opened it. It was a slender young man, chestnut hair bound in a makeshift knot, satchel on his back, and a gaze that blended timidity and interest. He grinned somewhat clumsily and inquired, "Are you Mr. Gregory?" I took 2 seconds to respond. I no longer utilized my full name often there. I only signed Mr. G in the archive and Checkers Group records. But I affirmed, and he proceeded. Apologies for appearing like this. It's that I'm the grandson of Mrs. Margaret, your neighbor here on the left. She said you understand vintage radios. I have one that was my grandfather's, and wanted to see if it could be restored. I remained motionless for a moment. A vintage radio that transported me back in time like a surge for over 35 years. I labored with electronics upkeep. I began repairing radios, screens, and cassette devices. I had a tiny workspace in the rear of the dwelling, and that's where I spent my afternoons after employment. I instructed Michael to handle tools when he was 13 years old. He detested it, said that was elderly guy stuff. I welcomed the young man inside. He extracted the radio from his satchel, a mahogany relic, faded controls, aroma of dust and reminiscence. I accepted it cautiously, inspected it, and felt something odd, as if my hand had discovered something it should never have released. Can it be repaired? Yes, I said, but it'll need time and forbearance. He grinned, eased, said he trusted that nobody else around there knew how to handle ancient items like that. And before departing, he expressed gratitude with a genuine clasp and a Mr. Gregory. It's good to meet you, sir. I shut the entrance gradually and remained there clutching that radio. And that's when I realized it had been a long time since anyone addressed me as sir with esteem. It had been a long time since I felt I could be beneficial, that I wasn't just a form occupying space in a vacant chamber. I carried the radio to the small surface I had improvised as a workspace, retrieved my instruments, donned my spectacles, and began disassembling cautiously. Each bolt reminded me of the times when Michael dashed through the workspace corridor, kicking containers, complaining about the disorder, saying his companion's fathers were more contemporary. And even so, I kept reassembling everything. While I labored, I opened a little container where I preserved some ancient memos. In it, I found a creased sheet. It was a health directive from Mary from when she became unwell. And behind the sheet, a memo. I love you even on challenging days. She always said that even on challenging days, and there were many, because nurturing a child with limited funds, sustaining a marriage, coping with employment disappointments and existence's aches, all that costs dearly. But she never surrendered, neither on me nor on Michael. Even when he distanced himself, she always said, "One day he'll comprehend." But now I know that maybe that day will never arrive. And that's okay, because I also needed to comprehend that affection can't be implored, that a man's honor is in knowing what he merits. And I don't merit to be called repulsive. Dusk descended, and the radio finally functioned. When I activated it, an ancient melody began playing. It was an orchestral piece, gentle tune, one of those that were parts of my youth afternoons. I shut my eyes and let it perform. I didn't weep. I didn't need to, because at that instant I didn't feel sorrow for myself. I felt proud for having accomplished something with my hands, for still being here, for continuing to endure. The next day, I delivered the radio to the young man. He grinned as if he had received a fortune. He gave me an embrace, something uncommon these days, and said his grandmother desired to meet me. That evening, I accepted Mrs. Margaret's invitation for tea. We sat on her veranda, discussed existence, about time, about descendants, and for the first time in a long time, I chuckled, a light, liberated chuckle. And it was there, between one cup and another, that she inquired, "Do you have children?" I swallowed hard, gazed at the skyline, and responded, "I had one, but he strayed from me, and I needed to discover myself." She comprehended, didn't inquire further, just grasped my hand like someone who knows what the ache of quietude is. And that evening, when I returned home, I understood that existence didn't conclude for me. It just recommenced. But everything altered when I received a ring from an unfamiliar number, and a voice from the history responded. The phone sounded in the late afternoon, when I was finishing preparing some pasta and sauce in the skillet. Simple formula I learned from Mary, made with noodles, cheese, and heated dairy. Here in this region, the components are different, but I manage. The aroma transported me straight to our old cooking area, the one she said was the core of the dwelling. But that phone tone pulled me from reminiscence with a peculiar force. I looked at the screen. Unfamiliar number, different code. I paused for a moment, considered not responding. After all, who still contacted me, I didn't provide the new number to anyone. But interest prevailed. I responded on the other side of the line. A female tone, youthful, courteous. "Are you Mr. Gregory Thompson?" I inhaled deeply before responding. "Depends on who's inquiring." She chuckled lightly. "Apologies for the fright. My name is Sarah. I'm an educator and was a trainee at an institution where your son instructed a few years ago." My heart froze for a second. Michael was an educator. He never informed me. never shared anything about his own existence. I only knew the fundamentals, that he resided in the metropolis, that he wedded a woman who never met my gaze, and that, according to kin rumors, had become someone significant. I found your name in an old booklet that was left with some of Michael's items when he departed the institution. It was a sort of log with scattered expressions, inventories, memos. Your name was there several times. And well, I thought you merit to know. I sat down gradually in the living room seat, the pasta and sauce scorched on the range. I didn't stir, just attended. He wrote harsh things, things that made me uneasy, as if he had resentment towards you, sir. But in the midst of that, there were also old memos from when he was little. Things like, "Today, Daddy took me to the playground." Or, "I got a blue truck from Daddy. It was the finest day of my life." I shut my eyes. That little truck, I recall, I purchased on an arbitrary Saturday after an extended shift. I halted downtown, saw the plaything in the display, and couldn't resist. I arrived home fatigued, but his grin compensated for everything. And now that was inscribed there, preserved somewhere I never knew existed. Apologies if I'm being intrusive. She proceeded, but I was moved. That aloof man I knew who evaded contact, who always seemed annoyed with everything. He carried a much more tender history than he displayed. "And why are you informing me this now?" I inquired in a murmur. "Because he vanished. His spouse, too. They departed the metropolis without notice. Nobody knows where they proceeded. And in recent days, I found this booklet while arranging some containers in the institution cellar. When I read your name, I searched for you. It took me days to locate, but I found an old record with a phone number, and now I'm here. I express gratitude for the ring sincerely, but didn't request the booklet. Didn't want to know more particulars, because at that instant, I comprehended it was useless to search for significance where there was only absence. Michael's positive recollections were like correspondences never dispatched. They existed, but didn't reach. And even if they had reached, they wouldn't alter what he became. After I disconnected, I positioned myself on the veranda, with the sun almost vanishing behind the hills. The final beams of light sketched shadows on the pale partition of my dwelling. And there alone, I contemplated about existence's irony. My son inscribed about me, contemplated me, but preferred to push me away his entire existence, as if recollecting was safer than coexisting. That evening, I opened a container where I preserved old objects, the marriage band, the timepiece Mary gave me on our 35th anniversary, a necktie I only wore once at Michael's christening. I touched each item cautiously, as if touching her and him simultaneously. And then I found a photo I had forgotten myself. We were all three seated on a park seat. Michael about 6 years old on my lap. Me with a thicker mustache. Formal blouse. Mary in a patterned gown. Open grin. Hands resting on my back. Behind the photo, her script. Love endures where we return. Even after ache. That shattered me internally because she always trusted in return. Always hoped Michael would return. Always had faith in his concealed goodness. And I tried to inherit that faith, but failed. And that's okay, because now it was delayed. He had made clear what he felt. That recording wasn't a lapse. It was the unfiltered truth that spills when we're careless. And his truth was repulsion. I spent the evening awake, pacing the dwelling, organizing volumes on the ledge, brushing a nook, cleansing a mug. I tried to exhaust my body to rest my soul, but couldn't. When morning broke, I sat at the dwelling entrance with hot beverage in my hand and penned another page in my journal. I don't regret departing. I regret not departing sooner. The following weeks were hushed, without rings, without correspondences, without remnants. It was as if Michael had evaporated from existence, and maybe that was it. A son who chose oblivion as legacy. That month, I decided to offer radio repair sessions to youths in the community. 4 pupils appeared on the first day, and even with difficulty with basic instruments and makeshift surfaces, I felt something was emerging. A modest commencement, not of being a father, but of being a man among other men. One of them, the youngest, inquired if I had descendants, and I said, "I have recollections, some positive, others negative, but for now, that's what accompanies me." He grinned and continued fastening the bolts of the amplifier, as if he had comprehended more than with terms. And it was then, exactly when I was starting to inhale again, that I received a fresh correspondence, this time with a name on the originator, and the name chilled me internally. It was from her, his lady, my former daughter-in-law. The casing was pale, no emblem, no official originator mark. But the name in the upper left corner was there in tiny curved letters. Jessica. I hadn't seen nor heard that name in years. My son's spouse. The woman who, from the first day, treated me as if I were an outsider in her existence. Aloof, dominating, and with a courteous grin enough to seem deferential, but always guarded. I knew from the start that she never favored me, but like so many fathers do, I remained silent, endured, overlooked for Michael's sake. I was gazing at the casing for minutes. I didn't open it right away. I carried it with me to the cooking area, placed it on the surface, went to the range, put water to heat, prepared my herbal infusion, the same one Mary made when I became too anxious with work matters. I sat down. The dwelling was silent, the world quiet. And only then I opened the casing, like someone opening an old injury with a blade. The correspondence began with a "Hello, Gregory," which already sounded insincere to me. She never addressed me by name. It was always Michael's father. And now she came with this tone of intimacy, as if she could conceal everything that occurred. "I know you must be astonished to receive this correspondence. I don't know precisely where you are, sir, but I imagined you still received mail at this location. I'm not writing to express regret, nor to defend anything. I just thought you merited to know some things." I took a sip of infusion. It was too warm. Or was my hand trembling? I continued perusing. "Michael is not well. Since you vanished, he entered a condition I had never witnessed. First it was panic, then fury, and now quietude. He doesn't converse with anyone, doesn't labor anymore, blames me for everything, says I urged him to maintain distance, that I always nurtured this aversion to you, and maybe it's accurate." I halted, leaned back in the seat. Maybe it's accurate. That woman demolished any connection between father and son with sweet terms poisoned behind. It was she who said the dwelling smelled stale. It was she who urged Michael to swiftly decide what to do with me. Once I overheard concealed when she said a good senior is in a care facility. I never forgot, never remarked, just preserved it. And now she came with this revealing tone. I learned he perused your memo, the one you left at the dwelling. He read it and wept, yelled, shattered items, said you didn't have that privilege, that he just needed more time. But the reality, Gregory, is that you two drifted so far apart that you no longer knew how to return? No, Jessica, it wasn't both of us. It was him. It was him who sealed the entrance, who shifted the seat away from the surface, who disconnected the phone without responding, who said with all the terms that he was repulsed by me. And that doesn't get undone with an apology, nor with a ornate memo that marks, injures, fractures. Today, I'm writing because I don't know what to do with him anymore. We're residing far away. We relocated from everything. And he informed me he would only truly exist again if he could see his father again. I know it seems delayed. Maybe it is. But if there's still a fragment of space in your heart, tell me where you are, even if it's just for him to hear your tone one last time. I finished perusing the correspondence. Folded, smooth, without corrections. No tear had moistened the sheet. And that said everything. She wasn't writing out of sympathy. She was writing out of desperation, because now the foundation had collapsed, and when the flood rises, we search for any plank to cling to. But I had already been wrecked a long time ago, and learned to navigate alone. I obtained a fresh casing. I wrote back with my resolute script. Don't search anymore. The man you recall doesn't exist anymore. The one who tolerated silently, who patiently awaited to be acknowledged, who endured disdain and feigned not to hear degradations. He perished the day he heard from his own son's mouth that he was a loathsome being. I existed too long behind a perhaps that never arrived. And I don't accept that position anymore. Go exist your lives however you desire. Just don't rely on me anymore. The repulsive one went to exist. Farewell. I sign not as a father, but as a man. I carried the correspondence to the downtown mail center, dispatched it, and when departing, purchased a robust beverage, sat in the plaza, observed the activity, youngsters playing, an aged pair sharing a pastry, a group of youths practicing melodies with strings, existence proceeding there. I comprehended something that might be evident to those observing from outside, but that only became clear to me at that instant. We expend so much time trying to be accepted by ours that we forget we can be embraced by outsiders. I was unseen in my son's dwelling, but here people perceived me, addressed me by name, said good dawn, invited me to sit, to converse, to chuckle. The correspondence I received wasn't a connection. It was a sentimental snare. And for the first time in existence, I didn't succumb. I chose myself. That evening, I preserved Jessica's initial correspondence in a compartment, and along with it, I placed the recording I saved on my device. Yes, I preserved his tone saying that. Not to nourish ache, but to never forget who he chose to be. And when I lay in bed, with my heart finally serene, I made one last memo in my journal before extinguishing the light. There's no pardon, where there was never contrition, and there's no fresh commencement without truth. The phone sounded again the next day, but this time I didn't even respond. The following week, quietude became my finest companion. No rings, no correspondences, no disturbance coming from the history, just the tone of birds in the dawn, the locomotive signal in the distance, and the pot whistling on the range as if proclaiming a fresh existence that finally started walking on its own limbs. I had decided I would no longer open space for recollections that injured me. The history that denied me affection now was just dust in recollection's nook. On Wednesday, I visited the little store, as always, obtained produce, meal, bar cleanser, and while compensating, Mr. Arthur, the shop proprietor, looked at me with that warm manner and said, "Mr. Gregory, Saturday there's going to be a neighborhood meal at the chapel auditorium. We assemble cuisine, tunes, and good dialogue. Why don't you appear?" I hesitated. Events with many individuals gave me a constriction in my chest, especially when the heart carries recent marks. But the way he spoke, the plainness, the way he placed his hand on my shoulder, all that reminded me of times when neighbor was still kin. I expressed gratitude, grinned, and promised I'd consider it. On Saturday, I awoke early. The sun struck strong on the pane, as if the day was summoning me. I bathed gradually, donned my preferred blouse, a pale green one with small pale designs that Mary said made me appear youthful, and I walked gradually through the community avenues. Youngsters dashed. Women adorned surfaces. Men arranged timber seats in the chapel's sheltered courtyard. I arrived timid, not knowing where to position myself. But soon someone summoned me. "Here, Mr. Gregory, sit with us." I sat and remained. I remained for hours. I consumed grains with grilled protein, drank fresh citrus beverage. I heard live tunes with harmonica and strings. One of the community's youths played a melody that reminded me of the rural songs of my youth. And there, in that circle of old seats, in that simple courtyard, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. People gazing into each other's gazes. Real people with imperfections, with narratives, with creases and rough skin, but with essence. At one point, a woman approached. Mrs. Celia, tiny gazes, hair bound in a disheveled knot, sturdy limbs from someone who laundered garments her entire existence. She sat next to me and said, "You have the demeanor of a man who has wept quietly." I concealed it. I looked at her and chuckled. I chuckled internally and responded, "Weeping quietly is what I did most in existence." "Well, now you don't need to anymore," she replied. "Here, if you want to weep, we bring a cloth. If you want to chuckle, we bring beverage. And if you just want to be quiet, we sit beside and remain too." That disarmed me, because after so long hearing that I was an obstacle, a nuisance, a load, someone said, "You can exist however you desire, and that's invaluable." At the conclusion of the meal, they requested me to narrate a tale. Everyone knew I was the radio gentleman, the one who repaired ancient things as if I had enchantment in my hands. I accepted the improvised amplifier, a small speaker with mended cable, and narrated the tale of my first repair. A broadcast receiver from the 70s that I recovered with a cord, a pin, and the aid of a illuminated taper. People chuckled, applauded, and for a moment I existed again. On the path home, I halted in front of the entrance, gazed inside, and thought, how is it possible for us to have more human warmth with strangers than with our own blood? How does a man who gave his existence for a son end up needing strangers to remember he's still worth something? Inside, I sat on the bed, retrieved my journal, and penned. The kin that didn't desire me taught me to value those who extend their hand without inquiring my surname. And it was in this atmosphere of calm and exploration that existence continued. Calmer days, some visits from core pupils, an invitation to assist refurbish the community archive. Gradually, I began to feel beneficial again, not as a father, but as a man, as someone with a history, yes, but also with a current. It was on one of these trips to the archive that I found an old container full of contributed volumes. Inside, a ripped edition of The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. The exterior almost undone, loose sheets, but the narrative inside still vibrant. And rereading that segment where the aged angler converses with himself facing the ocean, I comprehended that I was also him, a man alone against the flows, but who doesn't surrender, who rises, who hemorrhages, who forfeits and persists. I preserved the volume with me. It was mine now. That evening, when activating the living room illumination, I saw the aged snapshot of Michael still on the ledge, the one that came in the nameless correspondence. I approached, gazed for a few seconds, then opened the compartment, retrieved the frame, removed the snapshot, preserved it in a sheet folder, and in its place positioned the image from the chapel meal, me grinning next to new companions, people who made me remember I wasn't born to be remnants. The history, let it remain where it is, because now I had more to exist. And just when I thought there was nothing more that could astonish me, I received a visit at my dwelling entrance. A young woman with a casing in her hands and a mystery inside it. She was positioned there at the entrance, clutching the casing with both hands, like someone bearing something too delicate to risk dropping. She must have been in her mid-20s, hair bound in a low tail, subtle lenses, satchel leaning on her shoulder. When I gazed, I thought it might be some welfare worker, maybe from the chapel or municipal office. But she spoke before I considered inquiring. "Are you Mr. Gregory Thompson?" That surname, spoken in the tone of someone who didn't recognize me, no longer ached like before. I just affirmed. She grinned a bit clumsily and extended the casing. "My name is Emily. I think I found something that belonged to you." I remained still for a moment. I gazed at her, then at the casing, then at her expression, which wasn't of urgency or desperation. It was of concern, a concern that intrigued me. I opened the entrance gradually, welcomed her in. We sat on the veranda. She handed me the casing delicately. I labor at a nonprofit that gathers furnishings and objects from dwellings in stock or legal transaction process. We attempt to reuse, contribute, assist those who require. One day, we received a load of contributions from an old dwelling in Seattle. They informed me the dwelling had been sold somewhat hastily after the proprietor vanished. I found it intriguing. I went to inspect, and in one of the compartments of a cabinet, there was this casing addressed to you with a woman's script. My hands quivered a little. I didn't open immediately. First I inhaled. Emily proceeded. I should have just listed and left for someone on the team to dispatch. But I couldn't. I read the name, saw it was ancient, saw the warmth in the script, and thought you should receive it personally. I expressed gratitude. I gazed at the casing. It was pale golden, creased at the edges, denser sheet, aged with the aroma of something preserved for a long time. On the reverse, the script I knew as if it were mine. Mary. I shut my eyes. My heart pulsed like in youth times when I awaited her at the academy entrance just to see her traverse the courtyard, grinning at me. That script was hers. I opened the casing cautiously. Inside, a creased notebook sheet. Azure lines, dark pigment, gentle slanted script. I began perusing quietly. Dear, I'm penning this correspondence on an ordinary day, but my heart is constricted as if time were depleting. I know you've been fatigued. I know existence has been tough. Michael matured, and sometimes it seems we forfeited that endearing boy. But I desired to remind you that everything we sowed is here inside me, inside you. If one day I'm no longer here, and I don't say this for spectacle, but for reality, I want you to recall one thing. You are a good man, even when they question, even when he questions. Michael will distance. Yes, I sense it, but it's not your fault, nor mine. He'll attempt to shield himself from ache by being aloof. But don't harbor resentment. One day, perhaps he'll return, perhaps not. But even if he doesn't return, know that you did everything you could. Be resilient. Be yourself. Don't let anyone obliterate who you are. With affection, Mary. The terms danced in front of me, not from inexpensive sentiment, but because there on that matured leaf was the overview of my existence. Mary knew. She always knew. Long before me, even before Michael transformed into that rigid man, she already anticipated the separation. But even so, she protected me, gave me foundation. Emily remained hushed, respected my time. When I finished perusing, I creased the sheet cautiously, rose, went to the ledge, and opened the compartment where I preserve everything that matters. I preserved it there, like someone depositing a valuable gem in a secure. I returned, sat next to her. Where did you discover this precisely? She responded with particulars, described the district, the type of estate, the accumulated paperwork, the dispersed images, the absence of pictures on the partitions. Everything portrayed my old dwelling, the same one I sold after the recording. And the compartment where she found the correspondence was from Mary's desk, the same one Michael always disregarded. He never opened it. Emily never troubled to go through his mother's compartments. He discarded the dwelling without inspecting. And in the end, it was a stranger who found what was most crucial inside. She grinned delicately. Sometimes it's outsiders who gather the fragments that kin lets drop. And I knew at that instant that she had comprehended everything. I offered beverage. We conversed for another hour. I discovered she also forfeited her mother early, that she was nurtured by her grandmother, that she always had profound esteem for seniors and recollections. Before departing, she left a nonprofit card and said, "If you ever desire to contribute narratives, we accept those, too." I chuckled and promised to consider it. When she departed, I remained there on the veranda, gazing at the golden skyline of late afternoon. A gentle gust hit my face, and I comprehended that Mary's memo had arrived at the appropriate time, not as a summons back, but as an endorsement, a validation endorsement, as if she said, "You did right. You had bravery. And for the first time, after so long, I penned something in my journal without ache. Sometimes the affection we preserved stored returns not to reconnect but to console, and that alone is sufficient. That evening, I slumbered with the pain open, light chest and quietude finally at peace. But not everything would remain that way, because a few days later, I discovered through an indistinct message that reached the hamlet that Michael was returning to the area and inquiring about me. The information arrived as things arrive in small communities, in low tone, in the ear blended with beverage and oblique glances. It was the male center woman who informed me, almost murmuring as if it were a transgression. Mr. Gregory, I heard there's a young man searching for you. They said he came from Chicago. Tall, slender, curt speech. My heart didn't accelerate. There was no longer space for astonishment. Just a profound quietude invaded me internally, as if time had halted and everything was suspended in the air for a few seconds. I expressed gratitude for the data like someone receiving a climate forecast alert. I returned home gradually, sensing the midday sun hitting my back, each stride firmer than the other. I knew that day would arrive, not the way many anticipate, with embraces, tears, and regrets. No. I knew he would return out of arrogance, out of desperation, out of interest perhaps, but not out of affection. I sealed the entrance, leaned against the partition, inhaled deeply, and started pacing the dwelling in quietude, observing everything as if it were the first time. The ledge with my volumes organized by hue, the repaired radio that played orchestral music softly, the snapshot from the chapel meal, where I grinned for real, Mary's memo, now preserved in the rear of the compartment, with all the care that only those who lived affection know how to give. This dwelling was my sanctuary now, my haven, my piece of world, where finally I existed for myself, and nobody, not even my son, would take that from me. I proceeded to the cooking area, prepared robust beverage. While the water heated, I started penning a correspondence. It wasn't for him. It was for me. A correspondence I would never dispatch. But that needed to be penned. I retrieved thick sheet, my preferred azure pen, and penned like this. Michael, you returned, or at least you're attempting. But before you locate me, I need to say there's nothing here anymore. No bitterness left. No injury left. What exists now is just quietude. You had all the opportunities and wasted each one with the accuracy of someone who knows how to injure. You addressed me repulsive, reduced me to a load. Now you desire to return. Desire what? See if I'm still enduring. I am. See if I'm still your father. I'm not. I'm a complete man who rebuilt his own soul with honor. And you? I just regret you never learned to cherish those who cherished you until it ached. Farewell. I creased the sheet, placed it inside a casing without a name, preserved it inside Hemingway's volume. I found it suitable. The old man and the sea, isolation and endurance. In the following days, I proceeded more to the plaza. I played checkers with Mr. Henry, discussed governance with Arthur from the store. I assisted Emily organize the volumes in the new archive. And with each motion, each chuckle that came light, I felt more certain that I was in the right location, far from the history, far from those tones that once diminished me until I almost vanished. On Thursday, a dark vehicle passed gradually in front of my dwelling. Tinted panes, motor idle for a few seconds, and then departed. I recognized the design. It was the same one Michael used when he appeared the last time in my existence. I didn't exit, didn't open the entrance, didn't approach the pain. I remained seated on the couch with my booklet on my lap, penning loose expressions. A man who prepares for his own fate pens for himself, not for the spectators. The next dawn, I proceeded to the chapel, sat in the last row, and gazed at the vacant platform. I contemplated Mary, contemplated little Michael, contemplated myself. I prayed not for reunion, but for safeguard, because sometimes the only thing we need to request from the divine is that he continue upholding our choice. On the path back, I found Emily leaning against my dwelling partition. She had a volume in her hand and a concerned gaze. "Mr. Gregory, I received a visit at the non-profit. A young man said he was your son. He inquired if I knew where you were. I said you frequented the plaza, the chapel, that you taught sessions. He insisted, said he needed to resolve matters from the history. He used those terms. Yes. And he spoke with fury, with rush, as if it weren't about affection, but about dominance. I affirmed, 'Thank you, Emily. You safeguarded me. I didn't do it out of sympathy. I did it out of esteem. There are people we don't surrender, even for blood connections.' She handed me the volume. It was a restored copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with the inscription on the exterior, 'To the gentleman who learned to be sufficient.' I signed back and promised to continue attending the archive gatherings. That evening, I proceeded to bed earlier, slumbered with the pain sealed, and dreamed of the ocean, a serene, boundless ocean, where I navigated alone in a small but firm vessel, without direction, without chart, but with a light heart. And when I awoke, I knew Michael was here in the community and wouldn't depart without attempting to locate me. But I had already decided if he appeared, I wouldn't open the entrance. The entrance signal rang at 9:15 in the dawn. I was already up. I always awaken before the sun really settles in the sky. It's the routine of a lifetime, and now more than ever. I like to see the day emerging, like someone overseeing their own fate. I knew it would be today. Deep down, my entire body already knew, like the creature that detects precipitation, like the soil that knows the right time to arid. The signal rang a second time and a third, but I didn't stir. I continued there in the living room seat with Hemingway's volume open on my legs, and the beverage mug still warm between my hands. The entrance was secured, the drapes slightly apart. He couldn't perceive me, but I perceived his shadow reflected on the veranda floor. Michael. Not the boy who dashed through the yard screaming my name. Not the kid who slumbered embracing the pet and awaited me to return from employment. But the aloof, curt, resentful man who gazed me in the face years ago and said with all the terms that he was repulsed by me. That term still resonated, but no longer injured. Now it was a mark. It was evidence. It was a reminder of the boundary I would never cross again. He rapped first with his hand, then impatiently with his joints. "Dad, it's me." I remained hushed. He anticipated me to rush to the entrance, as I did so many times. Anticipated me to welcome him to open, inquire, weep, say anything. But no, nothing. "Dad, open up. I know you're there, but quietude. I just want to converse. Okay, I didn't come to request you for anything. I just want to perceive you. His tone wavered, but it was compelled like someone attempting to weep and can't. I know well. Michael always knew how to perform when he desired to obtain something. When little, he simulated fever to not attend academy. As a youth, he simulated modesty to get concealed funds from his mother. As an adult, he learned to simulate affection. Dad, I perceived the memo you left. I preserved it. I perused it 1,000 times, but I was furious that day. Dad, I said foolish things. I don't even recall right what I said. Deception. He recalled. Everyone recalls when they regurgitate the truth. The issue is that afterwards they attempt to gather with their hands what already became toxin. I became unwell. I am taking remedy. Jessica departed me, said I exhausted her, that I demolished everything. I forfeited everything. Dad, I'm isolated. Isolated. The same isolation he forced down my throat for years. The same one I confronted on hushed holidays, on disregarded birthdays, on unresponded communications. The distinction is that I didn't wish his ache. I just refused mine. He continued, I envisioned about Mom these days. She gazed at me with sorrow. She said I was going to forfeit you eternally. Dad, let me in just for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes was the time it took him to demolish me in the recording. 3 minutes and 15 seconds. I attended. I preserved. I didn't forget. I'm repulsed by that elderly guy. Honestly, he turns my stomach. Those terms don't vanish with visions, nor with ache, nor with remedy. I remained there motionless. The beverage was already getting cold. The volume open marked the page where the isolated aged man confronts the ocean, knowing that the creature he attempts to carry will become bones. But he persists, not out of optimism, but out of esteem. Michael ceased conversing for a few minutes, and then in a final inhalation shouted, So this is it? You're going to disregard me. You're going to feign I'm not your son. It was then that I rose without rush. I proceeded to the entrance. He perceived the floor creak and became hushed. I leaned against the entrance with my palm and responded. Not with fury, but with a calm that only processed ache can attain. I'm not feigning anything. Michael, you're the one who spent his existence feigning I wasn't your father. Now harvest the quietude you sowed. On the other side, he became mute. Depart? Michael, there's no place for you here anymore. I have nothing to offer you, not even terms. Dad, I'm shattered. You shattered yourself with your own hands. Now learn to gather the fragments alone. I'm your son. No, you're the man who addressed me repulsive. I shut my eyes, my palm still against the timber of the entrance, and completed. Go exist far from me. Quietude long, painful, but essential. I perceived gradual steps descending the veranda, the entrance opening, closing, and then nothing. I returned to the seat, retrieved the volume, sipped the cold beverage. The soul, however, was warm. For the first time, I felt the flavor of liberation without remorse. It wasn't joy. It was something else. It was self-esteem. That man out there was no longer my son. He was just a stranger who traversed through my narrative and chose to depart on his own. I just secured the entrance he desired to enter too delayed. That evening, I opened my journal and penned, "The greatest legacy a father can leave his son is the instruction that all disdain has repercussions and that honor is not implored." And I slumbered with the dwelling at peace, with my heart intact. Since that day, I never received word about Michael again. No phone rings, no correspondences, no memos slipping under the entrance. He arrived, attempted, shouted, and departed. And that's okay, because the entrance he attempted to enter wasn't the dwellings. It was consciences, and that one was already secured from inside a long time ago. I continued existing in quietude, without haste and without bitterness. I started strolling every dawn to the summit of the mound behind the hamlet. From there, you can perceive the entire community, the dwellings, the meadow, the store, the little plaza, the chapel. Each portion of my fresh existence fits in this vista. Sometimes I retrieve a portable seat, sit under the shade of a oak, and just attend to the gust hitting the foliage. There, I comprehended there's peace. We don't locate in embraces. We locate in absence. I started penning more brief accounts, loose recollections, expressions that came in the midst of the afternoon like reminiscence breaths. Emily perused some and suggested I dispatch them to a regional publication. One of them was issued. I felt vibrant, not as a father, but as a man who didn't vanish in desertion, who chose to remain intact even after being broken. The youths from the radio course continue arriving. Some converse little, others fill the chamber with inquiries. Everyone gazes at me with esteem, and that's more than I received for decades from my own blood. I discovered the world doesn't revolve around genetic connections. It revolves around reality, sincere affection, care provided without obligation. In the living room storage, I preserved two things I never relocated from their location again: Mary's correspondence and the memo I penned to myself, the one I left in the casing inside the volume. I peruse both from time to time. One reminds me I was truly cherished. The other reminds me that in the end, those who rescue us are ourselves. Sometimes they inquire if I have kin. I respond, I had, but it remained in the history. And I don't say it with sorrow. I say it with lucidity, because it's not the absence of a son that defines me. It's the presence that now encircles me. The Hamlet folks, the archive lads, the beverage lass who knows my name and puts sweetener the correct way. That's sufficient. I no longer envision about Michael, nor about Mary. I think my heart comprehended that to advance. We need to leave what was in the location it remained. Not that I forgot, but I learned to recollect without hemorrhaging. On the final page of my journal, I penned, "Life didn't offer me the son I envisioned, but it offered me the man I needed to be to endure without him. And that for me is already triumph." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.